Hi. In this lecture, we're going to talk about something called the game of life. Now, this is a very simple model of aggregation. Now, before I turn to the game of life, I want to preface this lecture a little bit by placing it in context. So remember, why are we taking this course? Well, one, to be a more intelligent citizen of the world, to just understand what's going on around us. Two, to be clear and better thinkers. Three, to use and understand data. And four, to better design, strategize, and decide. So what are we doing here with the game of life? The game of life is a very simple model that shows how things aggregate, and it gives us a lot of sort of surprising conclusions. Now, it's a toy model. It's very simple. It's not really about anything. It's not about climate change. It's not about the financial system. It's not about eradicating poverty. It's a model that sort of shows us how complicated aggregation can be. So the way you want to think of this model is the way if you learn piano that you think about sort of learning your scales or something like that. Or if you play basketball like I do, practicing your dribbling. This is a model that helps us practice our thinking, to learn the subtleties of aggregation. So what's going to be amazing about the game of life, as well as the one-dimensional cellular automata models that we study next, is we're going to see how really complicated the process of aggregation is. And so when we then go out and look at the world, which involves lots of aggregation, we'll have some deeper appreciation for why is it that it's so hard to infer by looking at the macro level what's going on at the micro level, right? And that's one of the things we saw in Schelling's model, and now we're going to see it sort of in a more extreme form in the game of life. Okay, the game of life was developed by a mathematician actually not that long ago. This was by John Conway. He's a Cambridge mathematician. He's a brilliant mathematician whose work has been in group theory. And this was just a game he came up with using just a Go board, which is a big grid, rectangular grid, and has little white and black stones that you place on the board. So the game of life works a lot like Schelling's model. Each cell, right, like this cell right here, has 8 neighbors. And cells can be either alive, which we'll color dark, or dead, or alternatively on or off. And so on is going to be dark, off will be light. Now, the rules of the game of life are fairly straightforward. If you're currently off, you can only come on if exactly 3 of your neighbors are on. So you need exactly 3 of the people around you to be on. So this cell that's currently off wouldn't come to life because it only has 2 neighbors on. If you're currently on, if there's fewer than 2 neighbors on, so only 0 or 1, you die of boredom. It's just nothing going on. You just turn off. If you have more than 3 neighbors on, you suffocate. There's just too many people around and they're using too many resources, you die off. But if there's 2 or 3 neighbors that are alive, then you can stay alive. So let's formalize that. The rules are quite simple, right? Cells are either on or off. If you're currently off, you turn on if exactly 3 neighbors are on. That's the rule. And if you're currently on, you can stay on if you've got 2 or 3 neighbors on. Okay? So off, it requires 3, on 2 or 3. Okay? All right. So if you look at this particular cell here, right, X in the center, what you get is it has 3 neighbors, 1, 2, 3, that are on. So that means the next period when we look at it, it's going to turn on. Right? So if we looked at that cell, the next time, we'll assume these other ones also stayed on. It's going to turn on. All right? Now, if you look at the same cell in this picture, now it has 1, 2, 3, 4 neighbors that are alive. And so what's going to happen is it's going to turn off. Okay? So now what we can do in the game of life is not look at just individual cells. We can look at entire configurations of cells. So now here's a starting pattern. Suppose I seed the world with these 2 cells. If I look at the one on the left, it has no neighbors on. And if I look at the one on the right, it has no neighbors on. So what's going to happen is if I seed the world to look like this, it's just going to end up dead. Right? Nothing's going to happen. Okay? Now, suppose I seed the world with 3 in a row. Well, let's look first at this person on the left. It has 1 neighbor on. The person in the center has 2 neighbors on, and the person on the right has 1 neighbor on. So what that means is these 2 cells on the left, right, they're going to die off. They're going to turn off. But and the one on the right is going to turn off, but the one in the center is going to stay alive. But now there's 2 other cells we got to worry about, right? Look at this one right here. This on the top. It has 3 neighbors that are alive. 1, 2, 3. As does this one. 1, 2, 3. So those 2, right, are going to come to life. And so if we let this go to the next period, what we're going to see is the original one in the center stayed on, right? The one above stayed on, and the one below stayed on. So we now have 3 in a row that look just like this. Now, let's let it go one more period. What's going to happen? Well, again, as before, this one in the center is going to stay alive. The one on the top and the bottom will die off because they have 1 live neighbor. But now the ones on the left and the right, this one right here and this one right here, they'll come to life because they each have 3 live neighbors. Okay? All right, so what's going to happen is it's going to go like this. Well, now let's let time run. Once we're like this, it'll go like that. And once we're like that, it'll go like this. And so what we get is we get a blinker, right? So the game of life is interesting because we started out with these simple rules, right? If you're on and 2 or 3 of your neighbors are on, you stay on. And if you're off, you only come to life if exactly 3 neighbors are on. And what we see is those micro-level rules can create macro-level patterns, right? Like blinkers. Okay, well, let's start with something else. Let's start with something a little bit more complicated. Let's look at this one. If we start here, this cell has 2 on. This cell has 2 on. This cell has 2 on. This cell has 1 on. Now, if we look around, we can see this cell has 3, right? And this cell has 3. And there's no others that have 3. So if we look at what happens in the next period, we're going to get a picture that looks like that. So the game of life not only can die off and create blinkers, it can also have systems that sort of grow. So one of the things we want to do is we want to sort of try and understand, okay, what can the game of life produce? Well, let's look at some classic examples, and we'll do this using a program called NetLogo. And we're going to look at 3 things. We're going to look first at a beacon, which is 2 squares of size 4. And then we're going to look at something I call the figure 8, which is 2 squares of size 9. And then we're going to look at something called the F-pimento, which is just a line of 3 with 1 on the right and then 1 below it on the left. Okay, so we're going to look at these 3 configurations, but instead of doing it by hand, because that takes a long time, we're going to use that same NetLogo program that we used for Schelling's model. Okay, so first we're going to do the beacon, and what we do there is we're going to draw these cells. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then next to it we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we can think, okay, let's press this go once button, and what happens is it goes like that, and then it goes like that. Now if you look at the individual rules and figured out what each cell was do, you'd figure out this is what's going to happen. We'll let this go forever. Let me slow this down a little bit. Right? And what we see is we get this nice little beacon flashing back and forth. Okay, now this is a lot like the little blinker we had before where it was going, up and down, sideways, vertical, horizontal. And, that's a nice little picture, so let's stop it. And now let's make this a little bit more interesting, and let's draw some more cells, and let's make this thing 3 by 3 cells. So that one's off one. Here we go. So now these things are 3 by 3 blocks, and we'll see what happens here. Okay. Now again, each cell is just following those rules from the game of life. So let's let it go once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. Okay, that's unbelievable, right? This looks like an 8 on its side. So if you put it in an angle, it looks like a figure 8. And if you watch this thing, let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what's really cool with the game of life is that very simple structures can create these elaborate patterns. And again, each cell is only following its own simple rules. So what we learn from this is that aggregation, right, simple things following simple rules can aggregate to form really complex patterns. Okay, so that's the that's the figure 8. Now let's do that thing I call the F-pimento. Remember, so that was 3 things in a row, like this, and then 1 in the center, off to the left, and 1 off to the right. Now let's just slowly go through this. Let's get it go once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It seems to be taking on a life of its own. Well, let's let it go forever. And what you see is it's producing things that are like little gliders, right? So it's producing things that move out through space, right? So these things it's like almost like it's alive. Now you can start thinking about some really interesting things. Like think about the human brain, right? The human brain has these neurons that follow simple rules, and by following these simple rules, these things are connected in such a way that they can create these really novel patterns that produce things like memory and thought and cognition and personality and all that sort of stuff. Well, the game of life obviously doesn't explain cognition or anything of the sort, but what it does do is it shows how simple things following simple rules can create incredibly elaborate patterns. Remember, because we started out, let's just do it one more time. We started out with an incredibly simple thing, right? We had 1, 2, 3 in a row, 1 up on top, 1 to the left. And then as we watch this thing unfold, right, as I click this each time, what we see is these incredibly elaborate patterns. And now we'll just sort of let it go on its own again, right? You see just really interesting things, including these things that glide across the space. that are known as gliders. Here we've got a picture of a particular state, and this is a simple glider. So here it is at time 0. And then if we go through the rules and think, okay, what happens in the next period, what you can do is you can look at sort of each individual cell, and you can say, okay, well, what's going to happen? Well, if you look at this cell right here, right, which is right here in this thing, it has 1, 2, 3 neighbors, so it comes to life next time. So if we follow that through, here's what happens. Here's where it is at time t equals 0, and then at time t equals 1, it looks like this. At times t equals 2, it looks like this, because this cell, which came to life, is now going to be dead because it only has 1 live neighbor, right? And then if you follow it around to t equals 3 and t equals 4, you find at t equals 4, it looks exactly like it looked at t equals 1, except for it's moved, right, 1 cell down to the right. So this, if I start with this configuration, it's just going to glide across the space. So this is, again, this example we call it an emergent or self-organized pattern, because this thing looks like it's moving. If you watched a movie of this particular starting point, you'll see something that just glides across the space. And so you might think this thing is actually flying, but it's not. What's going on is each one of those individual cells is following a particular rule. Okay? So here's what's really interesting then about the game of life. Remember, one of the reasons why we construct models is to understand the class of outcome. What do we get, right? Do we get fixed points, right? Does the whole system just sort of go to one thing? Does it alternate? Does it blink, right? Remember, we saw both those things in the game of life. Is it completely random, right, which we see down here? Or do we get these complex patterns? Now, the interesting thing, it's been shown the game of life can give you all 4 of these. Now, we saw 3 of them, right? We saw the systems that died off and systems that alternated, and the systems that were complex. You can also, the thing can just be almost completely random. So you can use it to generate random numbers. So what's interesting is very simple rules can aggregate to form all sorts of interesting macro level phenomena. Now, one of the things that people then have asked is, well, what's the limit of what you can get? And the answer is almost nothing. Anything you could do with a computer, you could actually do with the game of life, which is sort of amazing. Here's a particular configuration that if you want to, you can plug it into NetLogo. It takes a little bit of work. You got to draw these cells. This is a glider gun. So what this thing will do is it'll pulse, and it'll send out gliders in off in this lower right direction. So what you'll get is this thing will just pulse, almost like a heartbeat, sending out gliders. So it's really interesting because you've got, again, each cell is just following its own, those same rules, those game of life rules, and you're getting this really elaborate pattern. Okay, so what do we learn from the game of life? A bunch of things. One is we get what we call self-organization. So these patterns appear without a designer. So you get these gliders, you get these things that blink, you get these glider guns, you get all sorts of things. No one designs that from above. It's individual cells following individual rules that when they're placed in certain configurations, they produce these patterns. The patterns appear to self-organize. There's also what we call emergence. Now, emergence means when those patterns have some sort of functionality. So a glider gun, a counter. So you can use the game of life to create something that actually counts things, right? Or you can even use it to compute things if you interpret what those cells mean. So when those patterns have a functionality, we can think of that as being emergence. So you can think of things like consciousness and cognition as being emergent phenomena. Okay, and the game of life produces both these patterns and these patterns that seem to have or can be interpreted as having functions. The other cool thing about the game of life, right, is it helped us get the logic right? Without writing down the model, without running in a computer, we'd never be able to really figure out all the stuff that's going on. And we see how we can get really complex things from really simple parts. So that's something that logically we might not have anticipated. So like I'm sure when I started this lecture and said these are these simple rules, you might have thought, this isn't going to be very interesting, right? I mean, these are just a bunch of simple rules and it's a checkerboard. But then when you see all the amazing stuff that can come out of the game of life, you start realizing like, wow, okay, simple rules can produce incredible phenomena. That's something that I might not have known had I not constructed a simple model. Okay, so that's the game of life. It's a game that belongs to a class of models called cellular automata models. Now, it's just one. It's just one cellular automata model. What we're going to do next, in the next lecture, is look at a whole class of even simpler cellular automata models to try and get an understanding of what causes a system. Remember that question, like, why does a system go to equilibrium? Why is it complex? We're going to look at a whole class of cellular automata models to try and get at least some understanding of why that might be the case. Thank you.